Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. We're going to begin today, of course, with our world lead. 2.5 years ago, when the last American troops were pulling out of Iraq, President Obama hailed it as a moment of success.
We're leaving behind a sovereign, stable, and self-reliant Iraq with a representative government that was elected by its people. This is an extraordinary achievement. Nearly 9 years in the making.
All right, so how are things going with that extraordinary achievement, that sovereign, stable, self-reliant Iraq, the one the president was talking about? Not so good, it turns out. Islamic extremists with the group ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, have taken control of Iraq's second largest city, Mosul, and now they're vowing to march on the capital, Baghdad. They're moving quickly and effectively against Iraq's American-trained forces. Those forces are retaliating, carrying out airstrikes on an area where they believe the militants are based. But is it going to be enough to stop them? President Obama today indicated the U.S. is ready to get involved once again, telling reporters that Iraq will need more help and that he has not ruled out any option. But then a senior administration official attempted to clarify to CNN that the president is not considering boots on the ground. According to the New York Times, Iraq's prime minister practically begged the U.S. to carry out airstrikes on extremists last month, but the White House at the time said no. What is the U.S. responsibility here after waging war in Iraq for 9 years? I seem to remember another president who promised way back in 2003 that the U.S. would leave behind a better Iraq than the one it invaded.
We will stand with the new leaders of Iraq as they establish a government of, by, and for the Iraqi people. Our coalition will stay until our work is done, and then we will leave, and we will leave behind a free Iraq.
Isn't it pretty to think so? Keep in mind 4,486 American servicemen and women, not to mention countless innocent Iraqi civilians, died in the war in Iraq. Now, after all that sacrifice, the country is spiraling out of control. The extremists responsible spell out their goal in their very name. As we mentioned, they're called the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. They have pockets all over both of those countries. The U.S. has labeled ISIS a terrorist group. At one point, ISIS was affiliated with al-Qaeda, but in February of this year, al-Qaeda, the brand name in despicable, horrific terrorist attacks, they decided to cut ties, apparently because ISIS was too hardcore. Let's bring in our chief national security correspondent, Jim Sciutto. Jim, why did al-Qaeda disavow ISIS back in February?
Well, it's partly tactics, but it's also, if you could believe it, partly jihadi politics. Tactics because ISIS, known to carry things like beheadings, public floggings, too far, alienate the local population. Politics because the leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, would not play by al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri's rules, and so they split. But really, for the U.S., the split means nothing. The groups are equally brutal, and ISIS in particular, a magnet for foreign fighters who U.S. officials fear will return home, including here to the U.S., to carry out terror attacks well beyond Iraq.
On the ground and from the air, Iraqi security forces in a desperate attempt to retake northern cities now under the control of Islamic militants. But many Iraqi forces aren't proving up to the task. In Tikrit, ISIS fighters paraded hundreds of captured Iraqi police through the streets. And in the oil-rich northern city of Kirkuk, Kurdish militants forced to take over military outpost abandoned by the Iraqi army. Nearly 3 years after he ordered U.S. troops home from Iraq, today President Obama acknowledged the country needs more American help.
It's going to need more help from us, and it's going to need more help from the international community. So my team is working around the clock to identify how we can provide the most effective assistance to them. I don't rule out anything.
What that new assistance will be remains unclear. Iraq has asked for U.S. airstrikes. U.S. officials say they are now focused on developing options other than just training and equipping Iraqi security forces. On Capitol Hill, some Republican lawmakers could barely contain their anger at the administration's response so far.
The president should get rid of his entire national security team, replace it, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and bring in General Petraeus, General Keane, General Mattis, and others who won the conflict in Iraq including Ambassador Crocker, and turn this whole situation around.
Many Iraqis aren't willing to wait. An estimated 500,000 have fled as the militants moved in, seeking safer ground in Kurdish-controlled areas. Former commander of U.S. Central Command, Admiral Bill Fallon, says any lasting solution lies with Iraq's Shiite Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, bringing together Iraqi Shiites, Sunnis, and Kurds to fight for their country.
They've got a lot of equipment, and they have some of their forces are pretty well trained, I believe, by our folks and the NATO allies before we left. So I think they have the capabilities to do this. They need to get the political will.
Al-Maliki, however, has been a massively divisive Iraqi leader, alienating particularly Sunnis right into the hands of ISIS. If Iraq is to face off this threat, it needs a true unity government, and al-Maliki might have to go for that to happen. But any political peacemaking will take time that Iraq doesn't have now. They need an urgent response, and Jake, I've talked to a number of officials who are seriously concerned, or this country could be lost.
Jim Sciutto, thank you so much. The city of Mosul collapsed quickly when ISIS radicals overran it. Heavily armed militants took over the international airport and police stations, freeing more than 1,000 prisoners from the city jail. Iraqi security forces didn't bother to pack. Many ran off without their weapons, uniforms, or armored trucks. Our senior international correspondent, Arwa Damon, is standing by live in northern Iraq in the city of Erbil. Arwa, what is happening on the ground there?
Well, earlier in the day, Jake, we were at a checkpoint that leads into Iraqi Kurdistan, and it's on the main road away from Mosul. A huge line of vehicles, people fleeing the city of Mosul, not necessarily, though, interestingly, because they were fleeing ISIS. They didn't seem to mind ISIS's presence. They were saying that the fighters were there, but they weren't really bothering anybody. They said they were fleeing because out of fear of the government airstrikes. But what was also interesting was Kurdish fighters that have gone in and tried to prevent ISIS from moving further forward towards Iraqi Kurdistan, recovering some of those vehicles that the Iraqi military had abandoned and left behind, driving them into the Kurdish northern territory. People also going back, Jake, saying that they actually believed ISIS when it said that they could come back and live in peace, saying that they wouldn't be executing anybody and that they wouldn't be looting or pillaging. You know, we've been hearing in the reporting that was just taking place there about how this is really at the very core of it, about sectarian politics that exists here. And one really senses that on the ground, that people do feel as if this is a battle between the Sunni and Shia populations. And even though people don't want to live under ISIS, they don't necessarily want to live as part of an Islamic caliphate, they do not want to be subjected to the kind of alienation, at least the Sunni population doesn't want to be subjected to the kind of alienation that they've been feeling from the Prime Minister's government.
Arwa Damon, thank you so much, and stay safe. My next guests have the unique and honorable perspective of having actually served in Iraq. And now they're watching the hard-fought gains of the American military begin to unravel. Let's bring in Congressman Adam Kinzinger, Republican of Illinois, member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, a military pilot and major in the Air National Guard. He's flown refueling and reconnaissance missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. Joining him, of course, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, Democrat of Hawaii, who served 12 months in Iraq and currently is a military police captain in the Hawaii National Guard. Thank you both for being here. Before we get to the policy, there must be emotions that you both feel watching this because you have friends who died fighting for Iraq. What is that like?
It's painful. I served in a medical unit during that deployment to Iraq in 2005 and was faced on a daily basis with that most harsh cost of war, both of people who I knew and who I served with, who I spoke about recently during Memorial Day, and people who were from all over the country, from all different branches of service. Now to see what is happening there causes me to remember their service and their sacrifice.
Very painful, I would think.
It's heartbreaking. I mean, you know, almost 5,000 people gave their lives to bring Iraq freedom. And I thought, you know, after the surge, we were there. There were a lot of gains that had been had and a lot of hard-fought wins. And to watch it all collapse, I heard, in fact, the air base I was stationed at, Balad, is being evacuated. And I spent a lot of time there, and it hurts. I mean, this is very sad. Very sad for the people of Iraq and for those that sacrificed for them.
Let's turn to the policy of this. Congresswoman, you do not support the airstrikes that the Iraqis are asking for. Do we not have some obligation to help these people after the United States went in there and invaded and took out their government and created this chaos?
I think we've got to really understand what's happening here. We've got to do a couple of things. We've got to understand what's happening here, and then we've got to take a very clear-eyed look at seeing what impact, if any, can these airstrikes or other involvement actually make on the situation on the ground. The situation being, this is a religious civil war that's occurring between two Muslim factions, the Sunni and the Shia. Largely, this is coming about today because of this invasion that we did in Iraq a decade ago, where you have a government that had the opportunity, Maliki had the opportunity to create a unity government, bringing together the Shia and Sunni parts of the country and actually bring about peace. That did not occur. Instead, you have a government that has been oppressing the Sunni Iraqi people and has been discriminating against them and has really brought this about, where you have this continuing battle between the Sunnis and the Shias.
Congressman, I know you support airstrikes. You know there are a lot of people in the Pentagon very skeptical of that. They don't know that that would be effective. There isn't enough presence or potential presence for the U.S. to have on the ground there to be effective. And it seems like they're afraid of getting dragged down into a civil war that the United States really can't play a constructive role in.
Well, let's be clear. The full withdrawal from Iraq in 2011 was a complete mistake. Had we had a status of forces agreement, 20,000 troops, we would not be facing this situation. Are airstrikes going to be the panacea? I don't know. But we're seeing what happens when nothing occurs. You're going to have Baghdad, almost the size of the city of Chicago, in flames. You're going to have Iraq in flames. Imagine what that's going to do to the Middle East. If there's an opportunity to kill these bad guys that are coming in and taking on the Iraqi government, there's a reason the Iraqis want airstrikes, because they think it'll be effective. There's a reason Iraqis are doing airstrikes, because it's killing bad guys. I think we have an obligation to come in and to help push back this enemy that's creeping in. Also from inaction in Syria. This is where they've been able to plan and organize that in Syria. They're establishing this caliphate across the Middle East, and we will rue the day if we don't do action.
Congresswoman,
I think, sorry, if I just want to jump in, you have to define who are the bad guys. It's easy to say, let's go in and get the bad guys, but you have a divided country of Sunnis and Shias. The United States goes and takes action there on behalf of the Iraqi government, Maliki. You've got Iran coming in and saying, well, we're going to stand with Maliki, so now we're allying ourselves with Iran, and essentially, if we do airstrikes, becoming de facto air force for them. Or you have the Sunni Islamic terrorists who are fighting. So who are you deciding who are the bad guys? And the perception to the Iraqi people would not be that the United States is coming to fight for us, because they're part of this divided country.
Well, I disagree, because the Iraqi people have asked, and the Iraqi government has asked for the United States' help. I mean, what we're saying is, gee, since we don't fully grasp the situation, let the Iraqi government fall, because that's what's on the eve of happening. This isn't new either. This started in January.
Right.
And we're just learning about it today because it's exploding.
It is, of course, though, and I know you're not disputing this, it is, of course, very complicated.
Of course.
For instance, ISIS, in addition to being opposed to the Iraqi government, is opposed to the Syrian government. And many people wanted strikes against Assad. Well, guess what? ISIS wanted strikes against Assad, too. Is there not? I mean, if there's ever been a condition for blowback, and understand I'm not advocating anything, but if there's ever been a condition for blowback, this would be it. I mean, you don't know who you root against in a lot of these.
ISIS was taking advantage of the situation in Syria to help. Whenever you have lawlessness and craziness, they were taking advantage of that to establish their state in Syria. So are they opposed to Assad? Sure. But they were more taking the fact of now controlling large swaths of Syrian territory. They don't see national boundaries. Now they're moving into Iraq. They want to take all of Iraq. Imagine what this is going to do when this falls aflame. So we can sit back and say, gee, you know, who are the bad guys and everything, or we can step up and say we're going to stiffen the spine of the Iraqi military to take their land back and give an opportunity for more reconciliation.
And Congresswoman Gabbard, I want to give you the final word. One of the things that the American intelligence and military communities are very worried about is ISIS, not just there in Syria and Iraq, but actually coming back to the United States and doing things here in the United States. Is it not better to get them now there as opposed to having to deal with it later on?
Once again, you've got to be able to define who we're helping or who we're fighting against. Whether you're talking about Iraq, you're talking about Syria, you have many different complicated things going on that ultimately result in two civil wars that are happening. If we are, which I do not advocate for getting involved in either Iraq or Syria, if we're concerned about a direct threat to the United States or our interest from ISIS or other terrorist factions anywhere else in the world, we should focus our resources on those direct threats and take them out where they are, not getting mired into other civil wars that could end up costing many more lives and hundreds of billions more dollars.
Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois. Two people with skin in the game who actually know what they're talking about, even though they disagree completely on everything. Thank you so much for coming in, and thanks for your service, as always. Appreciate it. Coming up next, it's the question so many have asked since the day he disappeared. Why did Private Bo Bergdahl seemingly walk away from his base that night? Now, new letters obtained by the Daily Beast's Kim Dozier and reportedly written by the soldier himself explain why he did it.